Sophia was confused, her face turned red. Mike came closer and stroked her head with a smile. He ordered Sophia to kneel in front of him. She obediently followed the command. A second later, Mike deeply. The knock at the door made Sophie jump. She wiped her sweaty palms on her jeans and hurried across the small living room of her Boston apartment. The rent was late, 2 weeks late, and she knew exactly who was on the other side. She opened the door and found Mike standing there, tall and broad in a fitted black jacket, his strong frame filling the doorway. He looked even more intimidating up close, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. His deep brown eyes held hers for a long second, and Sophie felt her cheeks burn. "Morning, Sophie," he said, his voice low and warm. "Got a minute?" She nodded quickly, stepping aside to let him in, her heart hammering against her ribs. Mike walked in slowly, looking around the small space before turning back to her. His presence filled the room, making it feel suddenly too small, too warm. "I got your message about the rent," he said, crossing his arms casually over his chest. "You said you needed a little more time." Sophie swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. Yes, she stammered, hating how breathless she sounded. 2 weeks, just until I get paid." Mike studied her, his gaze steady, unreadable. Sophie shifted on her feet, twisting the hem of her sweater between her fingers. She felt like a schoolgirl caught doing something wrong, heat rising in her cheeks as she struggled to hold his gaze. After a long moment, Mike's lips curved into a slow, almost teasing smile. "I see," he said. 2 weeks is a long time." Sophie opened her mouth to plead, to promise she'd make it right, but the words stuck in her throat. Mike stepped closer, just enough that she could smell the faint scent of his cologne. Something warm and masculine that made her head spin. "But," he said, his voice dropping lower, "maybe we can work something out." Her eyes widened. She wasn't sure what he meant, or maybe she was deep down. But she nodded anyway, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. Mike reached out and brushed a strand of hair away from her face, his fingers grazing her cheek in a touch so light it made her shiver. "You're a sweet girl, Sophie," he murmured. "I can forgive this month's rent." Relief flooded through her, so strong it made her knees weak. She smiled up at him, her whole body humming with something that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the way he was looking at her, like she was something he wanted to unwrap slowly, carefully. Sophie didn't move when Mike's hand slid down to the curve of her jaw, his thumb brushing lightly across her skin. She leaned into the touch without thinking, her body answering him before her mind could catch up. "You sure about that?" he asked, his voice a low rumble against the thick silence of the room. She nodded, her breath coming faster now, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. Mike smiled again, a slow, devastating smile that made her stomach flip. His hand slid to the back of her neck, pulling her gently toward him. Sophie didn't resist. She tilted her head up, her lips parting slightly in invitation. The first brush of his mouth against hers was almost unbearably soft, a slow, testing kiss that sent a bolt of heat straight through her. Sophie gasped against him, her hands finding his chest, feeling the solid strength beneath the soft fabric of his jacket. Mike deepened the kiss, his hand tangling in her hair, tilting her head to get better access to her mouth. Sophie clung to him, her body arching into his, every nerve ending sparking to life under his touch. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her across the room and setting her down on the worn couch without breaking the kiss. Sophie wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, needing more of the warmth, the strength, the overwhelming rightness of him. Mike's hands roamed her sides, her hips, moving with slow, deliberate pressure that made her tremble. His mouth found her neck, his breath hot against her skin, and Sophie let out a soft, helpless sound that made him smile against her. The rain started tapping against the window, a soft background rhythm to the growing storm between them. Mike pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his thumb stroking her cheek again. "Tell me you want this," he said, his voice rough with restraint. Sophie answered the only way she could, by pulling him down to her again, kissing him with all the desperate, reckless need she had been holding back. Mike's weight settled carefully over her, strong arms braced on either side of her head, his body pressing her into the soft cushions. Sophie felt the heat of him through their clothes, the raw energy rolling off him in waves. Her fingers dug into his back, desperate to feel more, to pull him closer, to lose herself completely in the moment she had been too afraid to even dream about. He kissed her again, deeper this time, his mouth moving with a hunger that stole the air from her lungs. Sophie's whole body responded, arching up into him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest against hers. She could feel every slow, deliberate movement, the way his hand slid up under her sweater, the way his thumb brushed the sensitive skin of her waist, leaving trails of fire in its wake. Mike moved with a control that made her head spin, as if he was determined to take his time, to savor every reaction he pulled from her. His hand slid higher, grazing the curve of her side, and Sophie gasped into his mouth, her fingers tangling harder in his shirt. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his breathing heavy, his dark eyes burning with something fierce and undeniable. His thumb traced her bottom lip, slow and teasing, and Sophie shivered under the intensity of his gaze. "You're beautiful, Sophie," he murmured, the words rough and reverent at the same time. Her heart stuttered in her chest, a rush of emotion so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. She clutched at him, needing to feel every inch of him, needing to show him what his touch was doing to her. Mike's hands moved lower, gripping her hips, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. His mouth found her throat, planting slow, lingering kisses along her skin, each one making her breath hitch, her nails dragging lightly over his back. Sophie tilted her head back, giving him better access, her eyes fluttering shut as his kisses moved lower, his hands still roaming, exploring, worshipping. The intensity of it, the sheer depth of how much she wanted him, left her dizzy, trembling. When Mike lifted her sweater over her head, his movements were slow, giving her time to stop him if she wanted. But Sophie didn't hesitate. She raised her arms willingly, letting him strip the fabric away and toss it aside. He paused, taking her in, his hands sliding lightly over her newly exposed skin. His touch was gentle, almost reverent, as if memorizing every curve, every tremor. He kissed her again, slower now, his hands framing her face, grounding her even as her heart raced wildly. Their movements grew messier, more urgent, clothes slipping away, mouths and hands finding each other in a frantic need that neither of them tried to hide. Mike's strength surrounded her, his warmth soaking into her bones, his kiss stealing her breath until she thought she might never catch it again, and didn't care. He scooped her up easily, carrying her to the small bedroom without effort. Sophie clung to him, her legs wrapping instinctively around his waist, her mouth finding the line of his jaw, the curve of his throat. Mike set her down on the bed, hovering over her, his hands framing her face once more. His gaze searched hers, fierce and tender all at once, as if needing her to understand that this was more than just a rushed mistake. Sophie reached up and pulled him down to her, her answer clear in the way her body moved against his, in the way she kissed him, hungry, desperate, fearless. The first touch of their bodies together was overwhelming. Sophie gasped, arching into him, feeling the world outside the small room fall away completely. There was no rent, no city, no past or future. Just the heat of his skin against hers, the strength of his hands holding her, the rhythm they found together, slow and deep and inevitable. Mike moved with a tenderness that left her breathless, every movement deliberate, every kiss a brand against her skin. Sophie clung to him, meeting his every slow thrust, her body singing with every touch, every whispered murmur against her ear. The tension between them built higher, hotter, until it finally broke, leaving her gasping his name, her body trembling in his arms. Mike followed her over the edge, his body tensing, his forehead pressed against hers, his hands gripping her like he would never let her go. They collapsed together, breathing hard, the quiet of the room wrapping around them like a warm, heavy blanket. Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, there was only the sound of two hearts beating wildly, still tangled together, still unwilling to let go. The room had fallen into a deep, sweet silence, broken only by the slow, steady rhythm of their breathing. Sophie lay curled against Mike's chest, feeling the rise and fall of his body under her cheek, the strong, steady beat of his heart anchoring her in the soft, golden stillness of the morning light. His arm was wrapped around her protectively, his fingertips tracing lazy patterns along the bare skin of her back. Each touch sent soft shivers down her spine, calming and electrifying all at once. Sophie shifted slightly, tightening her hold around his waist, not wanting even a sliver of distance between them. Mike kissed the top of her head, a slow, lingering kiss that made her chest ache with something deeper than desire. She tilted her head up to look at him, catching the small, rare smile playing on his lips. "You all right, baby?" he asked, his voice still thick and low from sleep and everything they had shared. Sophie nodded, brushing her fingers lightly along his jawline, feeling the faint rasp of stubble under her touch. "More than all right," she whispered, her voice catching on the overwhelming truth of it. Mike cupped her face in his big hands, tilting her head so he could kiss her again, slower this time, with a tenderness that left no doubt about what this was. It wasn't just physical, it never had been. The kiss deepened and Sophie melted into him, losing herself all over again in the warmth, the strength, the quiet certainty of his arms around her. There was no hesitation now, no fear, only the sweet, reckless certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. When they finally pulled apart, Mike tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone in a caress so gentle it nearly brought tears to her eyes. "You don't have to worry about the rent anymore," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Sophie laughed softly, pressing her forehead against his. "That's not why I'm here." Mike smiled, a slow, deep curve of his lips that made her heart pound all over again. "I know, sweetheart, I know." They lay there for a long time, wrapped in the quiet comfort of each other, the world outside the apartment forgotten. The late morning sun filtered through the half-closed blinds, painting their bare skin in soft stripes of light and shadow. Eventually, Mike shifted, pulling Sophie fully into his lap, cradling her like she was something precious. She wrapped her arms around his neck, smiling against his skin, as he pressed slow kisses along her shoulder, her collarbone, the curve of her neck. "Stay," he murmured against her skin, the word more a plea than a command. Sophie didn't even hesitate. She tightened her arms around him, feeling the weight of the choice settle deep inside her. Solid, certain, unshakable. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. Mike pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, something fierce and protective shining there. He kissed her again, slow and deep, sealing the promise between them with nothing more than the meeting of their mouths and the beat of their hearts. Later, they made coffee together, laughing quietly as they bumped into each other in the small kitchen. Mike stole kisses every chance he got, brushing his lips against her temple, her shoulder, the tips of her fingers. Sophie couldn't stop smiling, couldn't stop touching him, needing to anchor herself to this new, breathtaking reality. As they sat on the couch, drinking coffee from mismatched mugs, Sophie leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling his arm settle heavily around her. They didn't talk about what it meant, didn't make plans for tomorrow. They didn't need to. In the quiet warmth of that tiny Boston apartment, with the city buzzing softly outside their window, Sophie and Mike built something stronger than promises. Something made of touches, glances, the steady beat of two hearts finding a rhythm they never knew they were missing. It wasn't just a moment, it was the start of everything.